and you know what's coming. You know that you're going to see singing Klingons by the end of the episode, and you're like, how in the world are they going to do this? Please don't make them rap. Like, what is this going to be like?
Nerd Legion is back with our final episode of, not of the show, of course, but
I was gonna say,
yeah, ever. It's over.
Wow.
This
comes as a shock.
It's Jover, Doa.
It was short but sweet, but it's Jover now, right?
No, final episode on Star Trek Strange New World Season 2. We have reached the end of the season and also the end of Star Trek probably for a long time, given the writer/actor strike that is occurring. It ended on a cliffhanger, of course. So how long will we have to wait for Season 3? A really long time. Most likely.
I'm worried because this is a type of situation that would result in a show just being randomly canceled, and then we talk about it for years to come to be like, well, what if they had continued? That type of thing just happens, right? So I'm worried about that happening. But if you need your Star Trek fix, Monty, there is one option that's coming out. There is a season 4 of a Star Trek show that's hitting a little bit later in the fall called Lower Decks.
Oh, okay. My favorite thing about our TikTok at Last Free Nation Culture, if you guys want to laugh, first off, the clips are great. Shout out to Adanion, our editor, who does this show as well. Was that the Lower Decks fans got mega triggered by my takes about Lower Decks. Mega triggered. They just couldn't handle it. And I have to say, Doa, Star Trek fans and probably most pop culture fans are not ready for esports level hot takes because it breaks their fragile little minds in ways that I didn't think it was possible. Just saying that Lower Decks was kind of questionable as a show in terms of its concept and calling it bad Adult Swim, which it absolutely is. But
I will say this. At least Lower Decks fans aren't as bad as Rick and Morty fans. They're the most annoying, mature content fan base in the history of the world. And I'm not including the My Little Pony Friendship is Magic fan base because that's not a show geared towards adults. It's geared towards children. So their adult fan base doesn't qualify for this particular argument.
Is that fan base still going? Didn't that show end years and years? I
don't think so. I think it's done, but it left its mark. It left its hoof print on me, if you will. This seeing this phenomenon emerge and kind of watching that kind of happen. So
yeah, well, thank God it's gone.
There you go.
In any case, we did criticize. You liked the crossover episode with Lower Decks.
I really did, and I'm not a Lower Decks fan, but I really did like the crossover. Yeah.
I thought it was pretty tired, but we do have the much anticipated musical episode. So we're gonna go over the last 3 episodes, all of which I thought were pretty good. Shockingly.
Yeah, I would agree. Funny enough, I thought that the final episode of the season was the weakest of the 3 that we're going to talk about today, and that's not even too harsh a criticism because it was still okay. It wasn't great, but it was still okay. But yeah, just to give you my tier list, right, of the 3 episodes here. I mean, episode 8, under the Cloak of War, I think it was called. Yes. I usually write the title down, but that was my favorite episode of Strange New Worlds ever. It's one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek in general ever, I think, at this point. It was fantastic. The musical was shockingly kind of fun, actually. I was going into it pre-cringing, and I really was impressed, actually. So we'll talk about that. And then the big cliffhanger one, we'll get to that at the end. I'll leave it a cliffhanger with everything I thought about that.
It was fine. The last episode was fine. We've said we're not super into the whole Gorn arc, but I'm glad at least they got back to it after ignoring it for effectively the entire season.
The entire season
in episode 1, when Admiral April said, "Oh man, good thing we avoided war with the Klingons because we couldn't be on war on 2 fronts with the Gorn," and then they just ignored it for 10 episodes before getting back to it.
It's like end. Even the writers of the show know that the Gorn aren't very interesting, so they're like, "Oh man, we set this up as our big bad, but like, do we really want to do? It's just aliens. It's just aliens. It's just I'm talking about like Ridley Scott, James Cameron aliens, alien movies, right? Chestbursters, Ripley, all that kind of aliens, I mean, that's boring. It's kind of you can put him in a spacesuit like they did, and that looks a little bit cooler, but it's still kind of boring. But we'll get to that. Let's talk about episode 8 though. I'll say it again. This is probably going to go down as one of my favorite episodes of any Star Trek series ever, because it was it really built a new depth to characters that we have not seen as much in this series. They've been doing a better job of it this season, post episode 4. But now a lot of things in retrospect make more sense. You and I were actually chatting about this a little bit, that this almost feels like an episode that belonged in season 1 because it tells you so much about Mbenga and Nurse Chapel as characters,
I totally agree. And a lot of our complaints, if you go back to our first episode that we did on Strange New Worlds, was that episode 1 really didn't make a lot of sense with the nurse and doctor fight. And it comes off as rather stupid because you lack the critical information that this episode gives you. And there's no real reason why this episode couldn't have been done in season 1, or it couldn't have been done earlier or before the episode where they fought the Klingons. Is the concept of the Klingon beating up drug still dumb? Yes. It is no less dumb now than it was before.
Starfleet Stimpaks?
Yeah, Starfleet Stimpaks from, of course, StarCraft.
Yeah.
But is it still stupid? Yes, it is. It is still stupid because obviously if this could be used, it would have been used repeatedly by Starfleet at every other point in time from this point forward, even though he seems reluctant to make it in this episode.
Don't they kind of imply that it does bad things to you as steroids and like speed and stuff often do?
Okay, Doa. If you were in a life or death situation, would you rather take the stim pack that maybe might kill you or hurt you in a long enough timeline, or I don't know, just use it to fight people, which is when you're under constant threat, like the people in Starfleet are in every Star Trek series, you'd think they would just break the glass in case of emergency a few more times.
Riker would have been like using that stuff all the time. I don't know.
We'll ignore that. It is dumb, but at least it makes slightly more sense now.
You designed it, right? Make more.
Even if I could, I wouldn't. It turns out that pumping your body full of adrenaline and pain inhibitors is bad for your health.
I'd rather die tomorrow than today. Come on, be reasonable. My team needs an edge.
And I also think it takes away from Mbenga's character, because what we learned is that he's just a badass. And I think this is cool. And Mbenga is like very quickly becoming my favorite character on the show, because the more development we get for Mbenga, like the cooler he becomes. And also I feel like he is a really unique character in the Star Trek universe. There's not a good analog of his kind of character in another show. He really stands out, I think.
I was thinking about this actually, and I thought he kind of is starting to remind me a little bit of Garrick from DS9 in a different way, in that you have a character that has a seemingly mundane role on the surface, right? Garrick was just a tailor, right? But there's this depth and this backstory and this kind of sinister past to them, that gets brought out more and more over the show as they're sort of called back into action. And I get that vibe with Mbenga too, that, is he a quiet doctor, or is he like a super assassin in secret? Turns out he kind of is.
Well, the thing is, like, Garrick was more of an intelligence spy master. And Mbenga is like Black Ops, right? So
it's more like the mundane appearing role with a interesting dark past,
He's also a Hippocratic Oath hypocrite, it turns out.
Hippocratic crit? Is that a word? I don't know. By the way, I also got like a filling on one of my teeth earlier this morning, and I'm still like slightly numb on this side of my face. So if I look weird or speak weird
or drool,
I feel it. I feel it right now, or drool. It's not because I took the Starfleet stim pack. It's because I was injected with a numbing agent that was very powerful.
All right. So this episode, I think conceptually is super cool, right? Because you have this Klingon general who is trying to basically be an ambassador for peace during the Klingon and Federation War, allegedly committing brutal atrocities on the planet of Jagal, which is where Mbenga and Christine Chapel, Nurse Chapel, are stationed, and they're doing emergency triage on this planet, and it's about the realities of war. And Mbenga is being begged by Starfleet Special Forces to go in and assassinate this general. And the general ends up kind of fleeing and allegedly killing his own officers in his escape attempt. And then he later becomes this messenger of peace and this person who is trying to build bridges between the Federation and the Klingons, which is an interesting concept. But at the same time, he's now on the Enterprise being transported by them. And clearly the people who are on Jagal, like Mbenga and Chapel, have very strong negative feelings about him and don't trust him, which turns out to be logical and true.
Yeah. It is interesting because that character, like, I really loved the depth in that you want to be sympathetic for this Klingon character that's become this diplomat, because, you know, we want to believe that people can change, and you know, maybe he did change, but then there's also the aspect of it. It's like, well, you're still responsible for this, you know, so you still should atone for that in some way. But who is the person who decides how you atone, you know? And if the government has decided one thing, you know, is it within the rights of someone else who is personally connected to the horrible things you did to, you know, mete out their own justice? So there's a lot to think about in this, especially in a post-war setting, you know, where I think one of the themes of Star Trek is a lot of the crew is dealing with sort of the trauma of having been in the Klingon War, right?
Yep.
And I think it's interesting to see a series approach that particular aspect, because, you know, war and battle has always been a big part of Star Trek, you know, but we really haven't seen a lot of you know, long-term exploration into the effects of a crew that goes through something like that. Where is in our own real lives, you know, I think a lot of us, you know, I have multiple friends that have been to war and then are still, you know, psychologically dealing with the consequences for that. So it's a very real thing that affects a lot of people, you know, in real life, that we either know or are watching this show. And so it's interesting to see Star Trek kind of explore that to a greater degree with not just Mbenga and Chapel, but like, oh my gosh, why do I always forget the pilot's name?
Ortega?
It's Ortegas. Yeah. You know, she was in the war, obviously. That's part of this episode too. So there, you know, it's a topic I think that Star Trek should be exploring a bit more, and I'm glad they are with the series, and especially with this episode.
In classic Strange New Worlds fashion, this is not the first time in Star Trek that this has been explored, because there's a huge arc in Deep Space Nine around Nog and his PTSD that ends up when he goes and he basically like lives in the holodeck with Vic Fontaine, which is the Vegas lounge singer. And
well, he loses his leg, doesn't he?
Yeah. And then he basically has a you know, a psychological, he has PTSD, which prevents him from kind of moving on with his life, and he has some psychosomatic conditions. And so I think that Star Trek has already done PTSD very well. Not to say that they can't do it again or it's not being done well here, because I think it is. But this is, again, you know, every time I want something new out of Strange New Worlds, I kind of feel like it's retreading old ground in many ways. But in spite of that, I do agree with you, Doa, that this is a really good episode. And because it deals with a lot more than that, right? And I think what's cool about this one, and where it does break new ground, and off the top of my head, I can't really think about where this has been done in Star Trek before, was your point about who deserves forgiveness if you are a war criminal, right? And is it noble? Because we find out later that the Klingon general basically has lied about killing his own officers, and that he was the one who gave the order to kill civilians, and that it was actually Mbenga who came and killed his officers while he was running away. So basically, the general has misrepresented himself in his attempt to become this broker of peace. And so even if his actions are noble, if they come from lies and if they come from war atrocities, does he deserve to continue, you know, being the bridge builder between the Federation and the Klingons? Because I think what we see from him, everything that we see from him in this episode, makes him appear that he is actually a changed person, and yet he still, there's the question of, did he pay for his crimes, right? And that is very deeply embedded.
Which again, like, raises the other question: is whose job is it to make him pay for his crimes?
Yes.
Is there a certain amount of like forgiveness that is understandable and acceptable at an institutional level, where a government can say, all right, well, this person will do more good now in this diplomatic role, despite what they've done in the past, versus the personal situation of, I was there, I saw what this person did. I represent the people that they directly affected with their, with the atrocities they committed, So that it is really interesting, because obviously it relates to a lot of things that happen in real life. But going through the episode a little bit more, it was kind of interesting to see Starfleet at war, because we've seen it touched on a few times here and there's the Dominion War in Deep Space Nine. Obviously, there's the Borg conflict in TNG that was kind of a smaller scale war, I suppose, to a certain extent. But I feel like we really never seen Starfleet like on the ground in the trenches like this before, which was kind of interesting. And we see where the pattern buffer thing came from too, where, and I know you don't like that, but I think it's better explained now in that it was sort of this janky, trick that he learned during the war to keep people preserved until they could get proper medical care, which again, would have been useful information to know before his whole daughter arc thing, would have made it a little bit less weird, but now we know at least, so whether that was written in there to kind of explain it, I thought it worked okay for the episode, because it showed some of the hard choices they had to make. He essentially pulled the plug on that one Starfleet guy that was in the pattern buffer so that they could like reset it to beam in a whole new group of patients, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just a lot of good stuff in this episode. I think the line "I am the butcher of Jagal" is now I think it's going to go down as one of those famous Star Trek lines, because that's really like a moment when like you're kind of coming to this realization at the same time as a Klingon officer. You're like, oh yeah, it was like it was him. It was actually Mbenga,
I told you I was there. I am the butcher of Jagal.
All of this time.
Holy crap.
I love this though, because basically, Mbenga, they start to lose, right? His Andorian friend, who was one of the special forces officer, who is begging him to come on this mission with them, because we learned through the dialogue that Mbenga was a special ops soldier at one point in time, and he says, oh no, I've left that behind me, I'm a doctor now, I don't want to do that anymore. And basically things get so desperate that he just goes on a solo mission to kill this general, right? And so he goes in, and even though the general took credit for killing his officers and escaping, right, and kind of like framing his officers, I guess, for the attacks on the civilians, and so it appears that the general himself had gotten fed up and therefore was killing his officers for ordering those attacks. Mbenga knows that it was actually the general who orders those attacks, and that his officers died trying to save him from Mbenga. But the general never saw Mbenga. He was fleeing. And so he didn't understand that Mbenga was the one who knew the truth. He was the only one, in fact, the only living person who knew the truth, because he killed the 3 other Klingons. And so I thought that was really ingeniously done, where Mbenga earlier in the episode asks which one fought him hardest, because he knew which one was the best fighter in that scenario, and the general just straight up lies to him. And then I really enjoyed the climax of this episode, because the general is trying to convince Mbenga, because he knows he was on Jagal, but he doesn't yet know that Mbenga was who he was and like was trying to kill him. But he comes in and he keeps trying to convince Mbenga to be the human part of the bridge between the Klingons and the Federation, and show that in spite of all they had been through on this one planet, in spite of the brutality of war, that they could be friends and a symbol of peace. He basically says, no, leave me alone. go away, I don't want to do this, until he finally just gets pushed to the brink by this general, and he pulls out the knife that he used to kill those Klingons. And they get into a fight. And what I love is that it's just left ambiguous as to who started the fight, because obviously the general, his whole identity would be under threat if M'Benga decided to reveal this. So if the general thought that he was going to get exposed, then perhaps he would have started the fight with M'Benga. But it's left kind of behind this, frosted glass in the med bay.
I love that.
Yeah, where they get into a fight, the general ends up with a knife in him and dead. And the best part is because only M'Benga knows that he is actually the Butcher of Jagal, that there is no evidence, because everyone else thinks it was the general, so it makes sense that he would have the knife with the other Klingons' blood on it. And so it appears that M'Benga is the one who got attacked by him and was just acting in self-defense, when it was really M'Benga with the knife potentially just killing him because he hated him and didn't want him to live, which is just... It is a beautiful ending to that, and completely plausible. Like, it's such a well-written episode. And this is why it's so frustrating to watch this show, Noah, because we get an episode like this where I'm like, damn, this is an excellent episode of Star Trek. So many philosophical quandaries to think about, cool revelations about this character, plausible plots where they thought about all the different angles and why M'Benga could get away potentially with killing this guy in a logical sense. And why can't every episode be like this? It was great.
Yeah, I love the ending. I agree. I do love the ambiguity. I'm fine just going through the rest of the series, not knowing, is M'Benga just like this murderer essentially now who's gotten away with it, or did he defend himself and he's still kind of dealing with that trauma as well. But and I'm fine with just never knowing. I think that's fine if they never go back and touch that. On the other hand, we haven't really gotten a great trial episode yet. They tried in season 2. Maybe we go back and we have a better trial episode, because frankly, this provides better material. This is better material for the trial than just hey, Una is genetically engineered.
Yeah, literally the same trial that we saw with Bashir and Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, exactly. So let's do something a little bit more interesting. If we're gonna do it, I'm on the side of let's just leave it ambiguous and just have that be a cool facet of M'Benga's character. But if you must go back to it, I think you could do a good trial episode out of this. Yeah, because it goes back to the concepts we already talked about. So.
Yeah, I thought this was great. I agree with you. I think it's the best episode of Strange New Worlds. I think it is an extremely memorable episode in the entirety of Star Trek. And that's a very encouraging sign, because as we said repeatedly, oftentimes the good Star Trek shows take a couple of seasons to kind of find their groove. You deal with a lot of up and down episodes, and then by the time you get to seasons 4, 5, 3 to a lesser degree, that's when all of the episodes, or the vast majority of them, become absolute bangers. And if we're on that trajectory, I'm cool. Yeah. Because here's the thing, all the characters are great in this show, honestly. Yes. It's not like Voyager that has the 2/3 of the characters are absolute trash. The good Star Trek shows, Next Gen and DS9, they've got these wonderful, wonderful characters in them. And I really like, and I think all the members of this crew are very compelling. And arguably, before this episode, maybe M'Benga was the most boring character, but all of a sudden, he's one of the most interesting characters. And there's so many things you can do with this backstory of his right now. Certainly that's going to come back around again, right? Somebody from his past is going to show up at some point in time. Somebody he thought he killed, or somebody seeking revenge for someone he did kill. There's a lot of angles you could go with this that I think are really cool.
Yeah, or Starfleet trying to rope him in again. Yep. To go on cool missions. I'm telling you, the Garrick, similarities are there, right? Where he's trying to leave that life behind, but he keeps getting drawn back into it, and that's fun. It was one of the most tense hours of television I've ever watched, because just every conversation on that episode has these layers on it, where it's some of the people in the room were there, some of the people in the room fought in that war, and some of the people in the room want to get through this and want to accept this diplomat, and it's great. And they keep ratcheting up the tension throughout the episode right to the end. And yeah, I think that was one of the best episodes of any show ever that I've ever seen.
Yeah,
it was that good. It was really that good.
Yeah. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
I would love more of that.
Yeah, me too. But I don't mind the lighter-hearted, sillier episodes as well, which takes us from that episode right into the musical episode, which again, we were worried. I didn't watch the trailer for it. I didn't want to know anything about it coming into it. I don't watch trailers for TV show episodes anyway. That's weird. But the first thing I wrote down was that no matter how this goes, I really respect the amount of effort it takes to make an episode like this, because all the choreography, actors really kind of stepping out of their normal way of doing things, which they all did fantastically. And just, so there's a lot of extra stuff that goes into an episode like this that I really appreciated, and I was planning to appreciate even if it didn't go well, and it did. But I mean, another thing is, as I've said this many times before, I love when I feel like I can sense the actors having fun, and it felt like everyone was having an incredible amount of fun making this episode too, because it was just so off the wall, which is again what we've come to expect from the series. You never know what the next episode is going to bring, what the tone is going to be, what the story is going to be. Like, that's the thing I like the most about the show. You just have no clue what the next episode is going to be. But man, I mean, where do we dive into this? My one initial criticism of it was that a lot of it is based around the romances involved in the series, which to me, the romances are the least interesting part of the series because we know none of them work out. We know where these characters end up. So like, who cares about all these romantic angles? Because we know that every single one of them fails.
I mean, you bring that up as an issue, and I totally agree, because I think one of the really hard things about doing this show, and this is why I generally advocate for when I think about Star Trek, what I want is stuff that happens after the current Star Trek, so after Deep Space Nine or after Voyager, after Picard, right? Like, I want more of that timeline because it's fresh and untrodden ground. Where the real issue here, and it also comes up as an issue in the finale, where you just know Christine Chapel isn't dead because she shows up in the original series. So it really does suck a lot of the tension away when it's very clear which characters must live and which characters are going to have successful or unsuccessful romances. And that's just something you have to battle against constantly in this series. At least for my wife who's watching this show, she doesn't know any of this stuff, so it's less of a concern for her. But if you are a Star Trek fan, it is irksome that you just know the stakes aren't there, right?
And you don't even need to be a very big Star Trek fan to know this stuff, because like, I never really watched the original series. I've seen like a couple episodes here and there, but just through watching Star Trek over the years, I know about these aspects of these characters, So yeah, when I'm watching that, I'm like, and again, like, not to jump too far ahead, but in the finale when Chapel's kind of trapped on the ship or whatever it is, you're like, she's fine. She's gonna be, she's in the original series. We know she's gonna be fine.
Yeah, she's fine.
Yeah. So the tension's not there. But anyway, getting back to the musical one, it really brought the name Strange New Worlds to the forefront for this series, because it's not just talking about it in a Star Trek sense, where they're going to like new places and exploring. It's also very much talking about it in a writing sense for the show, is that you are visiting strange new worlds of television through what the show is doing. So I think it did typify that. That's hard to say.
I think, this is clearly inspired by the musical episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is, very, very famous.
Is it?
Yeah.
I've never even heard of that.
Yeah.
There's a musical episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
Yes.
I never watched that show.
I haven't seen a lot of it, but I do know that I have seen that episode a long time ago. And
people might think I'm joking, and I'm not. I've genuinely never seen that show, and I had no idea there was a musical episode.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say, I do think it's obviously very unique for Star Trek, but I think for people who watch sci-fi and fantasy, some of them who are older or who are Buffy fans are going to remember that episode because it was a very big deal. So I do applaud them for doing this, though. And the reason why, I said this in previous episodes, the reason why I hate musicals is that it's not necessarily the content of the music or the content of because a musical could be any form of music. It could be any, deal with any subject matter. Why I struggle with musicals as a genre is because the switching back and forth between speaking and singing really destroys my suspension of disbelief. I have a very hard time getting emotionally invested in fiction.
It's not supposed to be realistic.
It's not about being realistic. I like opera. Okay. Opera's not realistic. Right. I'm saying the swapping back and forth makes it so it's hard for me to have suspension of disbelief, because I just feel like it's very jerking me in and out of the fiction. And so I struggle with that. I'm just saying, I personally, this is why I don't like musicals. So
I think it's easier for me because I grew up with musicals. My mom loved watching musicals, so I saw like all of the classic ones when I was a kid because she'd be watching them constantly. So like I guess I was conditioned to it.
I watched a lot of musicals when I was younger too. Never made it better. Never made it better.
Maybe I'm just accepting of musicals.
Why I like this musical is because the way that it's done is that by switching between talking and singing, that is explained by the phenomenon, right? So I can suspend disbelief easier because the explanation of why they are switching in and out is because of the anomaly that they are dealing with. So it makes it so I can get on board with this musical and not feel very weird while watching it. And I know this is a particular quirk to me. I enjoyed Hamilton, for example, but nobody told me. People told me Hamilton was a musical when it's an opera. And so as long as they're constantly singing and there is no dialogue, I have no problem with the suspension of disbelief. So this is why I liked this particular musical, was because there was a reason behind the switching between speaking and singing that felt very well done and preserved the kind of fictional integrity of that universe. And I like that.
Yeah, it even took it one step further, where we had an explanation for the singing, but then we also knew when it was more likely to happen. They set like parameters for what caused people to break out in song, which I like too, because then it happens in more logical sense. When there's a moment of emotional tension, the character has a tendency to start singing is what, how it all works. But one of my main criticisms for it was that a lot of the music was very samey. There wasn't
the
enough
music is not good.
difference between the songs. Yeah, there was one. The one I kind of liked a little bit more was when Una was doing sort of a Mary Poppins-esque song with Kirk, I think it was, about teaching him how to lead a crew. And I was like, it was really funny, I thought. And it was fun to hear them break away from a very generic, modern sounding musical type.
I'm going to get all of my criticism out of the way, because I want to say just straight up, I enjoyed this episode, but it's not flawless, right? And I don't blame them. As you pointed out earlier, Doa, this was an immense undertaking in order to do this episode in terms of preparation, singing, songwriting, choreography. Like, this was clearly very, very difficult, and I think it was successful, so I don't want to shit all over it too hard. But basically, the music is not good. It's okay.
Fairly generic.
It's generic. Yeah. It's generic. We're not getting like Lin-Manuel Miranda bangers in here, right? There's nothing, on the level of some of his work, whether it's like Hamilton or Frozen or whatever have you, right? So Encanto, but that's not what we're up for. It's an episode of Star Trek. It's not a feature film where the music.
We're not looking for we don't want to buy the LP afterwards.
I'm tempering my expectations on that front.
Yeah,
so
of course.
It's serviceable. The music is serviceable. Can all the actors sing? No. Christine Chappell's number is quite terrible. Ethan Peck does a good job. Celia Rose Gooding, who has won I think she has won an Emmy for being part of Jagged Little Pill, which is Alanis Morissette's musical. She's amazing. But there's a really big difference between how well some of these people can sing, which is really noticeable.
They had him sing a very, very little bit, and when he did, you could really tell why. We finally found a weakness for this man. He's got amazing hair. He's a great actor. But we found singing is not his strong suit. Yeah. Nice try though. But
yeah, I appreciate that all the actors, in spite of their singing abilities, tried, and I'm sure they got You know, a little, Christine Chapel definitely got a little auto-tune in there, I think. But
it worked, though. It all worked, you know, because we don't expect every crew member to be a great singer too. So they're sort of being forced to sing by this phenomenon. So you're not really even expecting there to be good singing, you know? So that's I kind of wish they would have gone farther with some of the characters being kind of bad at it, because, you know, it's an in-universe thing that's causing this. So they don't need to be good singers. That could be part of the humor, that one of them is forced to sing, but they're just bad, you know?
Yeah. And so that's why it worked. You know, that's why it worked. And I think that this episode was done really intelligently from a Star Trek perspective, and also accomplished quite a few things in a very short timeline that would not have been easy to advance character progression in a normal episode. It was kind of ingeniously done, if I'm being honest, because part of the trope of musical, and this is obviously self-referential from the episode itself, when the characters are literally saying, why am I singing my feelings, and why can't I stop revealing this private information? It really does a very good job in what musicals genuinely, or opera genuinely accomplish, which is that it is an inner monologue that is coming out via the music, and these genres are kind of fourth wall breaking soliloquies by themselves, right? And so they use that in order to actually advance character development pretty effectively, whether that is Pike's relationship with Patel, or La'an's relationship with Kirk, or the breakup between Chapel and Spock. And so I don't know if they could have accomplished all of these things as quickly and as well as they did without having this musical episode. It just feels like there was some really awesome character development that was happening, and they were using the genre of musicals at its most effective in order to get this done, and I thought it was really good.
They really got it. Like, they really did get what they could do with the genre. It wasn't just, hey, let's make a funny musical episode. It's like, let's actually utilize this. And I had this in my notes too, actually, where I was like, this is actually very cleanly wrapping up a lot of that, like, uninteresting romance that has been happening in the series, you know? It kind of put a little bow tie on some of those things where you're like, all right, well, this isn't that interesting of a little subplot, right? With the Kirk-La'an relationship, the Spock-Chapel relationship. Like, even the Patel-Pike relationship, which goes way downhill for a different reason in the final episode. You know, that's, you know, it's good that they use this episode to kind of wrap a lot of that stuff up, at least temporarily, so we can kind of get away from that and get to more interesting stuff. So I had that in my notes too. I thought that was a really clever way of using the genre to write themselves out of some situations that would have just resulted in a lot of, like, either they would have needed to spend an episode on it, which nobody really wants, or they would have had to spend a significant part of an episode on it. So this is a great way to just get it done in song and move on, which I really, really liked.
That was great.
Yeah.
And I like the way all the characters reacted to the situation as well. And I think my favorite one was La'an saying that this was a security risk, which is true.
Yeah.
And, like, as the security officer, you would say that, because if you can't control singing your secrets, but that is a huge problem, especially for her, who she must maintain the secrets of her time travel adventure with Kirk, right? So she realizes that this is really, really dangerous, actually.
What just happened? Why did I admit all that?
I told you, this is a security threat.
But the singing, how did that happen on the Cayuga too?
Because the improbability field is expanding across the whole subspace communications network.
To the entire fleet.
So it is treated with, in spite of all the kind of lighthearted silliness of the episode, some of the characters are very concerned with what this is doing to them, and to the degree that there is an actual crisis with the Klingons that is taking place, which I think is also very well handled.
Yeah, I mean, if you notice, tonally with a lot of the musical numbers, there's a negative vibe to it. Because you have to realize that this is a negative thing that's happening to the characters when they're singing, that this is uncontrollable for them, and it's traumatizing for them because they're saying things they wouldn't want to say publicly, right? So I like that they it's the fun, the haha aspect of it being a musical Star Trek episode, but at the same time you're like thinking, oh, this is a serious situation, and they're kind of treating it like that, which is great. And the Klingon thing is like, oh no, and you know what's coming. You know that you're going to see singing Klingons by the end of the episode, and you're like, how in the world are they going to do this? Please don't make them rap. Like, what is this going to be like? And yeah, it delivered. I would say it delivered in those brief moments.
Why have you?
Why you only calling us when you got your dramas? One of these days we'll repay you, we'll slay you. Gonna draw your last breath at the end of my glance. Your eternal torture is every Klingon dream. You know what I mean? Make of a scream.
What I liked about the Klingon thing is, again, the characters and the act logically in the situation. The Enterprise, clearly is fucking up. They were the ones who started this, and then they were the ones who spread it across the communication network to the entirety of Starfleet, and they were the ones who also accidentally spread it to the Klingons. So it's understandable why the Klingons are angry, and I just love that they're just on a beeline to go blow this thing up. They don't understand that that's going to cause a catastrophe, which is why the Enterprise crew has to defuse the situation before they get there. But I do love that they're very angry about the dishonor that they have suffered as a result of the uncontrollable singing. And I was terrified that we were going to get an entire Klingon number, Doa, and it was going to be too much. But they did the exact right amount of Klingon boy band singing / rapping, where you got the taste of it, but it wasn't overboard. It was just the exact right amount of silliness, and then it just went away, and that's all we get, and that's all we need. That's all we need.
It was like an intense burst of the most silly song we've seen yet. So they did it exactly how they should have, where it was the most, because Klingons are the most intense, people, right? So of course, like, they're gonna have the most overboard, huge singing kind of thing, but it's very, very short, thankfully. But I'm glad that they wait to go to the extreme to do it with the Klingons, and then they have it be very quick. But then it also does make you think and imagine all across the Klingon Empire, like Klingon boy bands, and girl groups breaking out in pop numbers, which is hilarious to think about. And that's nice, because we didn't need to see that, because our own thoughts are going to be funnier than what they probably could have produced in the larger setting. So yeah, I really like the way they did that too. It was, Oh, you know what I actually had as a note? I just noticed towards the end of this episode, breaking into the finale for the season 2, is I have a note that said, oh no, Pike's girlfriend is going to die. Because just the way that they ended that, where she's like, I'm going to go off and do this thing, the way it was sounded there was a sense of finality to it that I got the vibe right away during that episode. I'm like, oh, I think she's going to die. Which again is a great way to wrap up a romantic relationship. My mouth is numb. We'll edit that out. Maybe.
We won't.
Oh no. My mouth. I had a filling earlier. If you're just coming in now, the left side of my mouth is still very numb. I'm doing the best I can. Wrap up a romantic relationship. You try saying that, getting 3 injections. The first 2 were not enough. I was still feeling the drilling, and they had to go for the strongest stuff. It was miserable. But not as miserable as Pike is going to be when Batel dies soon. But anyway, so I did. That was another thing I feel like I called, because we don't know if she's going to die yet, but I'm pretty sure. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, let's go on to the next episode, because this is the Gorn one. We've complained.
Oh, hold on. Oh, sorry. Can I interrupt? One last thing. One last wrap up for the musical episode. I like that once again, every problem with the Klingons is solved by sending Spock to go get drunk with them.
As for the Klingons, Lieutenant Spock engaged in successful diplomacy over some blood wine. Otherwise, it's back to business as usual around here.
because that seems to be like a running theme now. That seems to be a running theme now, that Spock just goes in parties with the Klingons and gets drunk, and like that solves their issues with the Klingons for a temporary time, you know?
I also love that. Honestly, like what was good about the last episode and this episode is that the callbacks and references or explanations of previous episodes really strengthened the entire series. And I just wish that I hope the running joke about Spock getting wasted with Klingons continues, because it's just that's a great point. It is just super funny that after the whole like almost war that they had at the start of this season, and Admiral April just saying, "Oh well, Spock, your hangover is your punishment for mutiny." Now it's just, "Oh well, we almost blew up everybody, but just go drink some blood wine. It's gonna be Spock over there."
Wow, is this becoming a good Star Trek series? I think it is.
The last 3 episodes were good, man. They were good.
I think it really is. Yeah. Well, let's go to episode 10, the season finale, the big cliffhanger, the episode where we finally get around to Gorn stuff. But who cares about the Gorn? Because Scotty's in this episode. We introduce Scotty. Forget the Gorn. They're not interesting. They're just lizard people. We get Scotty. And you know what? It's a good Scotty.
It was a good Scotty.
Yeah.
Very funny relationship with Carol Kane as well.
Yep.
You find out. I think he's. I think the way they introduce Scott is great, and it makes me excited about how they're going to introduce other characters in the lead up to the original series and how they're going to start putting them on the ship over time. We don't know if Scotty's going to stay, but since his old crew has died, I would assume he's going to stick around at this point in time.
I'm already excited about the Pelia Scotty duo in the engine room. I think because I think
funny,
you gotta
honestly.
have, because this is another tenet of successful Star Trek series, the duos. There's the characters over time in both TNG and Deep Space Nine tend to kind of pair off and sort of become like duos almost. You've got Geordi and Data, I think, are a good one to think about, or Geordi and Worf too. I mean, they're not exclusive duos, but there's certain pairs that tend to work well, and the writers figure that out over time. So I immediately thought Pelia and Scotty could work well as one of those
like
classic Star Trek duos.
Kira and Odo, Bashir and O'Brien. These are, I agree with you.
Picard and Riker.
Yeah. So
there you go.
I think Cisco and Garrick like as well is just very funny.
Garrick and Quark.
Well, Quark and Odo as well. Yeah, all those.
Quark and Odo. Yeah.
So
but
anyway, I agree, and I think that you could already see the comedy brewing there, which was encouraging, because clearly, as Pelia mentions that one of her best students with some of the worst grades. So we know that Scotty's very resourceful and creative, but maybe not the most disciplined or
he just builds things. I like it. He's like, everyone else is playing like some sort of military sim, and he's out there playing Fortnite. He's just gathering resources and building whatever he needs at the time. I like it.
Yeah, pretty fun dynamic that I think they're introducing. I do hope that he kind of sticks around as a more permanent cast member going forward, because we have part-time Kirk right now, but full-time Montgomery Scott would certainly be fun.
I think part-time Kirk is good. Full-time Kirk is not right for this series. No. You know, I think it's fine they bring the character back as a reoccurring, guest star, but this is Pike's ship,
Yes.
So I think we should keep it like that. Yeah.
Agreed. Well, in any case, the Gorn are back. The Gorn are super boring still, because it's everything we've already seen from other movies. I mean, even just the visual shots, Doa. When they're on the broken wreck of the Cayuga and the tail comes down from the ceiling is almost a shot for a shot of aliens. It's almost a perfect shot of, from those films. So,
and here's the thing with the Gorn, whether it's a lizard rubber suit or it's a CG lizard, it's still just a big lizard. It's still just a boring monster. And like, here's why they are not ever going to be, I don't think, an interesting antagonist in this series, is because you can't really have a dialogue with them. They maybe indicate that you sort of can, because for the first time the Gorn has communicated something to Starfleet in that they kind of drew a line on the sand. Yeah, essentially, yeah. But you can't have the type of interesting dialogue that Star Trek thrives on, right? And like this goes back to me in like the Halo series, because in Halo, the video game series, the Flood are very interesting because they're really driven by these religious beliefs they have, but there's a very rigid caste system involved, and there's conflict within that, and there's lots of communication between the humans and the Covenant and all that. And then you got the Flood coming along, that's just monsters that run at you, and they're boring. Monsters that run at you are boring, right? So now I look at this show and I'm like, it's the same thing. There's all sorts of races throughout the Star Trek universe that are interesting to interact with. The Gorn are not one of them. I don't think they ever will be. We know they're still just big lizard people because of the original series. Can we please get past the Gorn? Can we just like have the first episode of season 3 be like, you know, solve the Gorn thing and then we just never talk about them again? That'd be great. Please.
Yeah.
I'm so anti-Gorn.
I agree with you, because the problem is that they're so reminiscent of aliens that it's hard to get past it. And you can't, like you say, you can't have a meaningful dialogue with them where they haven't actually presented that yet. And even the threat that they represent, such as you mentioned, Patel getting the eggs laid in her, not only is that just chest bursters from aliens, but it's even derivative of other forms of Star Trek, like the Borg, which is like once you get assimilated, you just become Borg and you're dead, right? Basically, with
usually
a few exceptions. But once you get the nano robots injected into you, it's pretty difficult to come back from that. And it's the same kind of impending doom sort of Damocles scenario when we hear about Patel with the eggs in her, which is that, as far as we know, that kills you 100% of the time, but they put her in stasis. Don't worry, Doa. They'll put her in the pattern buffer soon enough. They'll put her in the pattern buffer. She's going in the pattern buffer.
The thing is like Patel she's not an interesting character to me. We haven't seen enough of her and had enough of her doing things in the show to make her more than just sort of like Pike's relationship person, you know? Yeah. And that sounds dismissive. Yeah, it's a plot device, right? And that sounds dismissive to that character, but that's because they've been dismissive to that character. Yeah. She just sort of shows up to cause a little bit of relationship drama for Pike, and then she disappears until they need another injection of that in the show, apparently, you know? So I say, let the Gorn pop out of her, let it end, let season 3 be the season without romance. And just Star Trek, you know? And if it's romance, let it be a single episode romance, you know? Like, or find a way to do it well. But I just don't see, I just don't have a lot of confidence for, romance in the show being interesting for a variety of reasons that we've already talked about, so.
Well, maybe Mbenga can have an interesting romance.
maybe. I mean, yeah, because so he's not in the original series, so they can do whatever they want with him. So maybe that's possible. But as far as like the Gorn and Patel go, #free the Gorn, let them burst forth and end this.
I think it's also just a testament to how weak the Gorn are. If you think about this episode, you could literally replace the Gorn with any kind of existential threat. Like, you could make this a zombie movie or a zombie episode where they're all boarded into the restaurant, and it would
Zombies are boring too.
But that's not the point, Doa. The point is that it is exactly the same episode, no matter what antagonist you put outside of that restaurant, right? The most interesting parts are when they're hiding or trying to, go to this shuttle and scrap together everything. And so when an adversary is completely replaceable, which they are in this episode, it's a bad adversary. It's a bad adversary. It could be literally anything outside. Yeah.
So there's the Little Nurse Chapel arc, where she goes to the remains of the saucer section to oh no, she's just on the ship. That's right. She was just on the ship because she was temporarily there. That's right.
It's very convenient that she was the only one who survived, by the way. Extremely convenient.
Right? I know. That's there's sometimes this show strays into kind of like, oh, this happened because plot. So it's like, why is Spock?
We pull up my pencil.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm just going to rewrite this part right now, okay? Remember how she was on the planet and Patel says, oh, you're done here. Why don't you just beam back up to the Cayuga? And she says, okay, goodbye, beam me up, right? And here's the thing. she could have just been on the planet with the rest of the people the whole time. They didn't have to actually put her on the ship. And here's the reason why that's even worse, Noah, because there wasn't really anything about Spock or Chapel being on the ship together that advanced their relationship, because everything happened after they were beamed back up into the ship and they were like, oh, I'm sorry. I guess the answer could have been because the people on the surface were beamed up by the Gorn, so that would have put Chapel onto the Gorn ship, as opposed to maybe she needs to do something in the cliffhanger on the Enterprise because they got both her and Spock back. But I do think, I mean, she could have been in an escape pod. You know what I mean? It would have made more sense, or they could have picked up, for example, they could have been in an escape pod, picked her up on the other side, and they still could have done absolutely everything they did with the Cayuga in terms of making it crash into the beacon that was blocking all their communications. So I just feel it was really cheap, and there was nothing about being on the ship together and dealing with that Gorn that advanced the plot between Spock and Chapel. So what was the point? It was just kind of dumb.
Well, why did Spock have to go to the saucer section anyway? They said he was the only one who could do it. I'm like, right? The only one who could put the rocket engines on it?
So
really?
So I interpreted that. I interpreted that to mean that he might be the only person physically capable of doing it, because Vulcans are significantly stronger than humans, but it's also zero G. It's also zero G, so it's zero gravity, so like
that's a valid point too. I think we're explaining something that doesn't really have a good explanation again. You know,
that's what, because I thought about that, and I said it must be just because Vulcans are significantly stronger than humans, but I don't think
he's only half Vulcan.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. He's still much stronger than humans, and than full humans, and so I thought there was going to be some aspect of that mattered. Maybe they could have said he's the only one with the appropriate zero-G training, which also would have potentially made sense. But they didn't even bother to explain.
They didn't say that.
Yeah,
no, we need drama. Send Spock. That's what I got.
He's the only one who can provide the necessary drama, Noah. Only Spock.
But it's not even real drama. It's like they even went as far as the classic like bang on the window, but he doesn't hear you go by. It's like, oh come on.
Spock! Spock!
Like we had two great episodes, and now this one it wasn't terrible, but it was just kind of generic actiony, you know. It was uninteresting to me overall. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. It was very mediocre.
Baby steps. I appreciated that it wasn't incredibly terrible like the first episode of this season, because
we've come a long way.
At least when Admiral April gave orders to Pike in this episode to stay on that side of the line, they, even though they are disobeying orders, you can see the reasoning behind it, and it feels more subtle. It's not let's mutiny and steal the Enterprise and maybe start a war. It's we're going to get these people off of this planet, and we're going to do it via infiltration and a secret mission. We're not just going to go fly around to the Enterprise like antagonizing Klingons, right? And they're trying to do it in a very subtle way. And, you know, it was all trickery and trying to, you know, fool them by pushing the Cayuga's remains into the beacon. Now, obviously, the Gorn get pretty...
I like that.
Yeah, they figure it out, and they start getting pissed, right, and attacking the Enterprise.
But I like that little plot aspect to it, where they had to sort of like use the, you know, the remnants of the ship to do that. You don't see a lot of ships crash in Starfleet like that. You don't. It's pretty rare. Forgetting about some of the big, you know, obvious space battle episodes, it's a pretty rare circumstance where a Starfleet ship gets destroyed, which I like. That's something I've always liked about Star Trek, is that when a ship is destroyed, that's a big deal, because that does not happen very often. So I liked how they kind of handled that in this one.
Yeah, and it felt really impactful. Maybe not to the degree that it did in Star Trek Generations, the movie where they destroyed the Enterprise.
Yeah. That was the Enterprise D, which is apparently repaired, by the way.
Oh, great!
They fixed it.
Great.
For Star Trek Picard season 3.
Great. I'm not watching that anyway.
It was explained fairly well when they did season 3. You should watch season 3. It was pretty good.
Fair enough.
Skip the other two.
But yeah, I agree. It felt really impactful, and to your point about Starfleet in general, yeah, I think it is a big deal when we see these battles and we see the ships getting destroyed, and it feels very meaningful when ships get destroyed in Star Trek, and it did here as well.
Yeah.
It did here as well. So I like that even though they are technically disobeying orders, they were being at least more subtle about it this time rather than just literally directly disobeying an order and then stealing the ship, right? And obviously captains have to use their own judgment, and that's part of Starfleet, is that you can't always go by the rules because each situation is unique and it's up to the captain's judgment in order to do that. Whether, Pike will be punished for this or not will be a different story, but probably, there should be some level of conversation that comes out of this with Admiral April or other higher-ups at Starfleet, but we'll find out.
What I kind of got from it was that it seemed like Starfleet was like weirdly intense about not having any sort of conflict with the Gorn, because you'd think normally like this was a Gorn attack on Starfleet personnel. Yeah, so I was kind of surprised that like Starfleet wouldn't be like, yeah, just go get our people back. That's it, Yeah. But it kind of, to me, and some other things earlier in the series I feel like kind of indicate this too, where Starfleet is just very, very afraid of entering into a conflict on a large scale with the Gorn because the Romulans are out there, the Klingons are still on the edge. So to me, this seems like a very fearful Starfleet administration.
So why this is ridiculous, Doa, and I think it's not so much Pike's action in this one or the actions of the crew of the Enterprise, where that was really unbelievable in the first episode of season 2, but it is, I think, the admirals and Starfleet Command that's really unbelievable in this one, because if they send you this demarcation line, you may think, oh, well, we were settling, we created this colony, maybe it is their territory and we don't understand that. Right. And so perhaps we were the ones who did an act of aggression. But when they just destroy one of your ships, that is unprovoked aggression. And what are you going to do? Like, you're worried about a war with them. They literally will destroy your ships for no reason. So that line's already been crossed. You have to defend yourself.
You think so?
Like, just think about it logically from a military perspective. You must defend yourselves because there's no way to know where their territory is. They just arbitrarily draw the line and send it to you after they've already taken your colony and destroyed your ship. And they can do that at any time they want. So if you do nothing, the only thing the Gorn learn is that they can do that whenever the hell they want. So you have you have to retaliate. You must retaliate.
We know the Gorn have already attacked Starfleet colonies too, because La'an has had that experience herself, where she was living was attacked and destroyed, and she was captured for a while. So, yeah, it is a bit bizarre. That did stand out to me too. That it was kind of weird that they wouldn't, they wouldn't want you to go in.
Yeah, it's not how a military would operate. Like literally, if the Cayuga was destroyed around this planet, then you just have to say, well, we're gonna save our people. And the first act of war and aggression was the Gorn. It wasn't a warning shot, get out of our territory. It was, we're destroying this, we're taking your colony, and oh yeah, here's the line. But considering you can't communicate with them and they can change the line at any point in time, you have to just push back and show that they can't do that. Otherwise you're weak, right? Otherwise you're weak.
So this episode ended in a big cliffhanger where it's like the whole, like fire kind of thing, like the end of TNG season 3 when it was Riker, saying that versus Picard's Locutus of Borg ship. Right. So it kind of calls back to that a little bit, I felt like. But there was a weirdly long pause with Pike where he just kind of stood there and looked around. I was like, this has gone past indecisive to just a bizarrely long pause. And I'm like, oh, it's a cliffhanger. Oh, okay, I got it. All right, get on with it. Throw the to be continued out there. We get it. Yeah.
Why is Pike incapable of issuing orders on his own ship? He lets other people do it, or he just stands there while a bunch of Gorn are literally firing on the Enterprise. I'm like, dude, take command, for God's sake.
He's like the college professor that wants to be everyone's friend.
Exactly.
Where it's like, no, you're the authority figure. You have to be that person, But that's a Pike thing, right? And every captain is different. Pike's thing is he runs a very loose ship, social strata wise, and I guess regulation wise, and pretty much in every regard, he runs a loose ship. He just likes to hang out. It's a party in space, and Christopher Pike has invited you. And so I guess I don't know, but that was still a really long pause at the end. He just kind of stood there,
and even his crew is saying, "Captain, orders."
Yeah, I was
worried
worried he was fighting the urge to break out in song again.
That would have been an interesting twist.
Yeah.
What about
it's not over.
the Gorn musical? Yeah, we missed out on that.
Oh, yeah. They just do death metal or something. It's like, we the Gorn. I can see that.
I can see it too.
Yeah. Either way, so I guess we have to, I mean, unless you have anything more to say about the final episode, I guess we need to talk about season 2 as a whole, because we've reached the end of it. It's been a long journey filled with twists and turns, ups and downs, but here we are at the end.
I appreciate this show's willingness to take risks. I think it's had some very high highs and some really low lows. I hope they've learned from the low lows and we can get more of what we saw ending this season. Because even as critical as we were the final episode, it was still way better than the first couple episodes of this season. Way better.
Yeah, I mean, I think the low point of the series so far has been Spock Amok. I'll say it, Spock Amok, one more time. I needed to. We haven't ever hit that low since then, and that's good. And season 2 started off pretty rough. I think it was the first. Let me go back and look at my notes. It was the first 3 or 4 episodes that were just not very good. Really, 3. Oh yeah, 3 was alternate timeline. 4 was okay. So it started getting good at episode 4. Episode 4 was Among the Lotus Eaters.
Yeah,
that was the episode where they went down to the planet where the former Starfleet guy had taken over, and people were forgetting things. And that was the beginning of good. So really, it only took about 3 episodes for this season to start rolling, and it was pretty much good from then on for the most part. We had charades, the funny Spock episode.
So very well done. I didn't like the gas station episode where they just randomly blew up the gas station because of Dead Hammer.
Yeah,
but even though that was bad, that one was just more forgettable. It wasn't just a heinous crime against Star Trek like episodes 1 and 3 were. Those were actual. Those were actual acts of war declared by the writers against the memory of Star Trek. Whereas finally they seem to have gotten on board later in the season. So.
Well, it got good after that. From then on, it was smooth sailing with episode 7, Those Old Scientists, which I really enjoyed. I know you didn't, but then we have 8, 9, and 10, which you just talked about. And so, overall, when we started doing the show, we said we were going to rate things every episode, and we did that a little bit, and then we started forgetting to. But I feel like now at the end of the season, we have to rate it. So,
Star Trek
previously.
ranking.
We did, yeah. We used that previously. Do you want to continue using that, or do you want to use a different metric? Okay, we'll go with that. All right.
I'm giving it Lieutenant Commander. All right.
What? You stole mine. I was seriously going to say Lieutenant Commander. All right. Well then, so if you say Lieutenant Commander, which I think is a good place for it, I have to say Commander. I have to go a rank higher because I liked some of the episodes, namely Those Old Scientists that you weren't a fan of. So I liked the season, I think, a little bit more overall than you did. So I'll give it a solid Commander. A solid 3 pips if I got my Star Trek, pips correct. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think this show really struggled at the beginning, and unfortunately the problem with this show is we have to deal with the baggage, particularly of the La'an time travel episode, for a really long time, which is just annoying. And the Gorn kind of suck as antagonists, but there's a lot of really good episodes in here. I thought the Spock charades episode was, I thought, extremely good, and the characters are all great, and honestly the actors in this show are all really good as well. It really, as many good Star Trek shows, especially Next Generation, the more episodic Star Trek shows, it does live and die on the strength of the characters, because you're introducing the whole purpose of this is to play with the characters in new situations every week. And I was dreading that musical episode because of the way it was marketed, but I thought the actual execution of it was really good. So it was a pleasant surprise. And I thought the season ended strong, and I'm actually glad we have this writer's strike, not because I'm glad writers aren't making money, but because they're going to have a long time to think about the next season. And I think this period of reflection might actually do quite a bit of good for the show.
Yeah, fair enough. Hopefully they'll watch our show and then they'll know exactly what they need to do. One can only hope. Fingers crossed. But I think in conclusion, for my part, for this, I think the characters can only get that good when the actors are that good. And I think this is one of the best acted shows I've seen in a long time. Not just Star Trek, but just in general on television. Mostly because of the range. I mean, the actors in the show can really kind of do it all. They can even sing, right? I mean, you've got really great dramatic chops, really great comedy chops, and kind of everything in between there. So I'm just so impressed with the cast of this show overall, and it's just a lot of people that I really enjoy watching work. You know, I think they're all doing a great job. The writing has really kind of come online for the most part, it seems like. I hope someday this means Akiva Goldsmith delivers us another Batman film, but one can only ask so much. But as far as Star Trek Strange New Worlds goes, I'm very optimistic about the future of the show. I'm really, really enjoying it. I was looking forward to every episode every week, even if it ended up being like a bit of a bomb, I loved that they were, like you said, willing to really kind of visit strange new worlds in a television sense and do interesting concepts. They would try anything. And I hope the show doesn't lose that. I hope they don't ever feel like they need to play it safe and like maintain whatever success they've achieved with this show. Keep going crazy. Keep doing whatever you want to do. I can't remember her name, but I know the actress that plays La'an is the person that was really pushing them to do a musical episode. So it sounds like you're getting pretty good suggestions from your cast too. So, rope them in, take some advice there too. Because I think a lot of unique ideas seem to be coming out of that camp as well. So yeah, I think overall, I really, really enjoyed this season. I'm very much looking forward to season 3. I'm worried that we're going to have to watch a bunch of Star Wars stuff until then, which is weird to say. I've always been more of a Star Wars fan than a Star Trek fan, but lately, as far as this show goes, Star Trek's winning the content scene right now, I think, between the two Star IPs.
Well, Andor was good, and that's what we're going to be doing
Andor
next
was
week.
Good.
Is Ahsoka.
Not Andor. Ahsoka, that's right.
Ahsoka is next week, guys. So it does come out. The show, the first 3 episodes you said are going to be released on the 23rd of August. So we will cover those episodes, and hopefully it will be as good as Andor. I really hope.
Let's do a little preview. Let's talk about where our expectations going into this a little bit at the end. So it's I have, as with any Star Wars content, I am very, very, very cautiously optimistic. I liked the trailer in that it looked like a lot of good old-fashioned lightsaber swashbuckling, which I kind of been missing a little bit. I think
earlier this episode, I don't watch trailers for TV shows. Also, Doa, this episode, I watched the trailer for Ahsoka.
I don't watch trailers for individual episodes. I do watch trailers for TV shows, but not for individual episodes. Maybe I didn't clarify that properly, but anyway, I think the era in which this show, The Mandalorian, are taking place, the post-Jedi era, is an interesting era to explore more, because you've got the remnants of the Empire out there. You've got, the burgeoning New Republic and all that kind of stuff. I feel like these shows let us sort of forget about the sequels and forge a new post-Jedi Star Wars timeline almost, which I like, because I think the sequels are terrible. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I think it's going to be something. We'll see what it's going to be.
I am filled with dread. Please don't mess up Admiral Thrawn. Please don't mess up Thrawn. This is the one thing you can't do. Please.
It's Lars Mikkelsen. He's a good villain actor.
Please don't mess up Thrawn. Okay. That's it, guys. We'll be back next week with Star Wars. See you then.